WNST, Towson, Baltimore, and Baltimore Positive. We're positively into the baseball season. It's like 4th of July week. We've got a competitive team. Things are happening. They got some young players. Even had a winning streak over the weekend. Luke Jones joins us now. Luke, I am disappointed that the visors, the Oriole visor with the old Oriole cartoon bird with the white panel and the orange and the black wasn't available. But I am thinking about getting in line to get one now. So it's getting to be about that time. I'm back on the bandwagon now. We're almost to 500, right?
Yeah, I mean, you're talking about a club that's playing much better baseball. And really, the last 2 months, go back to the beginning of May, they've played right around 500 baseball. They've played a little bit over 500 since Adley Rutschman arrived. And, oh, by the way, since the last time you and I talked, he's really been hitting the ball the last 2 weeks or so. 10, 11
That's
doubles.
Be the measurement, right? The day he comes up is the new, whatever they were 12 games under, whatever that number was. We put that number away, and we start to measure them from the minute they brought Rutschman up, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think and it's not to say that it's just a light switch that comes on. I mean, they're going to go through some tough stretches, and as much as they've played pretty solid baseball for quite a while now, you still look at the rotation and you're like, okay, how's that going to hold up for another 3 months? You know, I mean, you're just looking at that in terms of what's sustainable, what's real, what's meaningful, and what's more statistical noise. I mean, there's some noise going on, but there's also a lot of good things to see. But when the moment he arrived, and I wrote this at BaltimorePositive.com back in late May, that was the kind of the sea change in terms of, okay, so much of this rebuilding, placeholders, waiver claims, guys that don't really belong in the majors, they're not really trying to win at the majors. The figurehead, the face of the pipeline just arrived. So that should mean things are starting to turn, and it's not going to happen right away, but that's a signal that things are starting to change. And to their credit, they've played pretty good baseball since then. I mean, to go to Chicago and they win 3 out of 4, would have had a great chance on Sunday if not for the fact that, well, Dylan Cease is pretty darn good and really shoved for 7 innings. But hey, they even made
2 more outs in the 9th inning. Give me 29 outs, and maybe they win on Sunday.
They made it interesting in the 9th inning. So I mean, the biggest thing you can ask right now, and look, through 74 games, they're 34-40. They're on pace for that's 74-88. That's nothing to do cartwheels over, but compared to where they've been the last few years, it is progress, and it is something to be encouraged by. And if nothing else, they have been more captivating, more interesting to watch on a regular basis. If you're tuning in on a nightly basis, and I know lots of people still aren't, and a lot of damage was done over the last few years, but it's more interesting. It's more compelling.
You put them on at 9:00 now, they're in the game, usually.
No question.
And sometimes winning.
Right. Well, and a lot of that is because of their bullpen. I mean, and it's amazing. What was it? Friday night, they have a bullpen game. Austin Vault starts, I mean, right now they have 3 starters that are kind of, you can count on them to give them competitive outings, even if it's not always great.
They're at least think about if Zimmerman were okay and Rodriguez had gotten here, it might be really representative come All-Star break. Really.
Well, and you didn't even mention John Means. So
of course,
right. I mean, so yeah, I mean that's what's kind of crazy about this. I mean, to finish my point from Friday night, they had 5 former waiver claim bullpen arms combined to 1 hit the White Sox. I mean that's it's crazy. I mean, it's not how you draw it up in terms of the big picture in building a winner, but it does show the organization's ability to, as much as you might question still the long-term starting pitching, they've done a nice job with identifying bullpen arms and coming in, and maybe they make one adjustment. Maybe it's a guy just getting a fresh start, but they've had guys that have given them good innings and given them representative outings. But it really is wild to the point that you just mentioned. If you had told someone at the beginning of the season, April 8th, John Means would start 2 games and then have Tommy John surgery. Grayson Rodriguez, who I think most people would have expected by now he would have been in the majors, just based on where his, kind of his path was going through Double-A and
a lot of other organizations he would have been. In organizations where he could have win, he would have been up last year in September, at least throwing a little bit, right?
Yeah.
In normal times, COVID, we have all sorts of things. But I agree with you. He's a major league pitcher pitching in the minor leagues, right? Before he got hurt.
before he got hurt. So you have those two. I mean, DL Hall, has not been stellar his last couple outings at Norfolk, and he's been through a lot. And I'm not throwing cold water on him, but he's not ready yet. And some people thought maybe he could have been here by now. You mentioned
Some
Bruce
people thought he was ahead of Rodriguez at points last year,
Oh,
right?
well,
When came on.
he was drafted a year earlier. I mean, he was ahead of him until he hurts. He has the stress fracture in his elbow last June. So, but you look at that. You mentioned Zimmerman. I mean, he's been so bad that he was sent to AAA. Kyle Bradish has really struggled ever since that stellar, elite, exciting start he had in St. Louis, where he struck out all those batters, gets through 7 innings. He hasn't been right, and he's on the IL with shoulder inflammation. Although the early signs doesn't seem to be something overly serious, but you're always worried when you hear about a shoulder. So you hear all of those factors. If you had told me all of that, Nestor, on the starting pitching side, I'm saying, yeah, they're probably on pace to lose 110 games again. But because they've had such a good bullpen, because their bats, even though it's still a lineup when you get down to 7, 8, 9, and you say, oh, that's still not ideal. But the top 6 spots in the lineup look much better now, and you're getting great years from Austin Hayes, and Mancini swung the bat well, and so. And Rutschman, like I said, the last 2 weeks has really turned it on offensively. So you have a lot going for you, but I guess when you look at it right now, you look at the starting pitching and say, okay, how's that going to look in July? How's that going to look in August? How's that going to look in September? But for me, it also suggests that, hey, there's still room for improvement here, and they're already playing some good baseball. So I didn't even mention what Jordan Westberg and Gunnar Henderson, the two infielders, which the weak link on this team from a positional player standpoint is pretty clearly the infield. They're raking at Norfolk, so we could see either of those guys but before the season's over.
Well,
so
you wonder where the cavalry is with pitching, but there is a little bit of a pipeline and position players too that they're not going to play. They're not going to have this lineup next year. At the bottom of their lineup, they realize, as we would say with John Harbaugh to Mix and Match Sports, below the bar, right? Like below what they're going to need to do to win.
Yeah, I mean, Tyler Nevin and Rylan Bannon and we could talk about Ramon Urias. I mean, he's someone who swung the bat well at times going back to last year.
Chirinos was catching 6 weeks ago too, so he had all sorts of things, right?
Sure. I mean, I love Jorge Mateo defensively, but is he going to hit enough? And that's looking more and more like no. So he might be more the guy that might be your utility player, which, hey, if you got a great glove and you're not going to hit much, you can live with that as your utility guy. Even
Ryan Flaherty's a manager now, right?
Sure. Yeah, go figures. So there are plenty of aspects of this team that you still say, yeah, there's still work to be done. My biggest long-term concern does remain the starting pitching. But when you look at how they've drafted, that's kind of been deliberate. They have very much trended toward drafting college hitters. And I think the thought with that in a long-term sense is you get a surplus at certain positions, and then you go out and trade for starting pitching the way the Astros got Justin Verlander and Garrett Cole at one point. And you look at what they did there. So that's probably what the model is. Now, time will tell how that plays out. Time will tell what the payroll will look like. It goes back to all the questions about ownership that aren't going to go away. But in terms of what we're seeing on the field, certainly a lot to be encouraged by. And it's just been a lot more enjoyable to watch. I mean, you're talking about a team now that is on the cusp of having its first winning month since August of 2017, which speaks to how lousy it's been for 5 years. But I think you also do need to give them a tip of the cap right now and say, yeah, they're playing better baseball. And Trey Mancini said it during the Chicago series that they're going to the ballpark expecting to win on a nightly basis now. And yeah, they're still losing more than they're winning. And let's keep in mind, it's not as though they've had these long extended winning streaks either. But I think the big key for this team right now is the flip side of that. We haven't seen those stretches too often where, I mean, think back to last year, they lost 19 in a row. I mean, go back the last few years, these stretches where they lose 15 of 17, they've really minimized the valleys, so to speak. They'll lose 2 or 3 in a row at times, but they get back on track much more quickly, and they really minimize those low periods much better than they have the last few years. And it's why they're sitting there in late June, and they're certainly not in contention. I don't want to say that, but they're playing more competitive baseball. And again, it's been more compelling to watch on a nightly basis. And for right now, and again, that's not the bar, that's not the end game at the end of the day, but it sure beats where they were a couple years ago, where even the most diehard of fans were having a tough time tuning in and trying to be engaged for a full 9 innings on a nightly basis.
Luke Jones is here. He is Baltimore. Luke, you can find him. I found some baseball stuff. I want to talk about my baseball cards that I found before we get out of a baseball segment. But I do want to say this. They might not be looking for a manager after all this, right? Like Brandon Hyde has sat around for a period of time now. The thing's turned a little bit. It feels like if they do win 78 games or 76 games or 79, whatever they're going to win. God, if they won 81, it'd be like, right? But if they win 70 some games and they get to where they're going and the fan base is satiated and clearly the brothers are going to fight and it's going to get the court. All that BS that's going to go on. That's another conversation unto itself as to what they're going to do to improve the team. But the manager feels safe all of a sudden, right?
Well, I mean, and it comes back to how could you ever fairly judge Brandon Hyde based on the players on the 26-man roster?
But that doesn't get guys like him not fired. Guys like him get fired over
there. Of course.
Sam Perlazzo did, right?
Of course. Well, we talked about this with the Houston example. I mean, Bo Porter took a lot of bullets for a long time for those lousy Astro teams, and then they bring in A.J. Hinch when they're ready to win.
He did the same thing here. They bring in Buck and the water turns on, right?
Yeah. So, and let's be clear, that could still happen over the next couple of years. However, one thing that I've said, and I've tried to convey this to you as much as possible, as difficult as it could be to talk about this team over the last few years, but I've never gotten a sense from this clubhouse that they've tuned out the manager, that they haven't played hard. I think it's been very rare when you've questioned effort. And look, the cynic would say, well, they're professionals. They should be trying every night. But we also know that doesn't happen. And even some really talented teams, not just talking about the Orioles, but elsewhere, where you can have situations where you tune out the manager and you have guys that aren't listening and you have cliques within a clubhouse and you have a lot of dysfunction, quite frankly. I haven't gotten that sense over the last few years. And look, some of that might just be you have so many guys on the roster that are happy to be here and they don't want to rock the boat and they're just going to listen. But you've always gotten a sense, and it's especially true this year, that these guys really play hard for Brandon Hyde. And I think he's someone who understood what he was getting into when he was hired in the winter of 2018. However, when you're still going through it on a nightly basis, that's difficult. I mean, you want to talk about how tough it is for us just watching it on a nightly basis. How about being the guy that is writing out the lineup every night and looking at that lineup and saying, these guys can't win? He's not going to say that publicly, but he's thinking that, right? I mean, he had to be thinking that over the last few years. And he's looking when it gets to the 6th inning, even in a game when he has a chance. And recent years where he's looking at the bullpen and saying, that guy's down because I've had to pitch him the last 2 nights and I just don't have many options. So that's changed a little bit. Clearly, the bullpen has been fantastic. And Brandon Hyde has more to work with. And anytime he's asked about the improvement, even questions where you can tell someone's fishing to kind of get what his fingerprints are on this club, he always brings it back to the players, and he always brings it back to the fact that he says, hey, we're more talented now than we were a couple years ago, and these guys are playing hard, and they're doing a nice job. So he's been unassuming. I as much as he has a personality that we've seen him at times kind of have that that fire with some umpires on occasion. It's not a guy who really comes across as having much of an ego. I like Brandon Hyde a lot, and I'm rooting for him to get that opportunity, as you mentioned. When this thing, not right now, but over the next year or two, when you're hoping they really start being competitive, and we're starting to talk about wild card and things of that nature, I'm hoping he's still the guy, and I think he's done a good enough job to deserve to be that guy. And I'm not going to sit here and say that I know for a fact that he's a great manager, but again, how in the world could you really judge him over the last 3 or 4 years? I mean, it's just impossible. He could be the next Earl Weaver, but I mean, Earl Weaver wouldn't have won with these guys over the last few years. So it's been nice to see, and it's been nice to see him. To the fact that you brought that up shows that people are taking notice that, hey, these guys are playing hard for him, and he's taken a lot of bullets, but it's been nice to see him and this club be more competitive. And yeah, I'd like to see Brandon Hyde get a chance when you have an off season where you actually, spend some money, make some moves where you're saying, this is about getting better for the coming season. This is about getting better for the next 5 years. In addition to the young guys coming up, from the minors, and then you see what happens. Then you judge a little more critically. Then we're paying more closer attention to that bullpen move you made in the 7th inning, or what you did in the 8th inning, or what you did in extra innings on the road. So it really, from that
Or if
standpoint,
Rutschman's catching
it's
9 days a week like he was when Wieters came up with Buck, right? Like Buck rode Wieters like a mule, right? Like so, and we talked about it every day.
Oh, no
here
question.
Year, right? In 2014, 15, like so. What is the philosophy, of Brandon? I don't know. I've never talked to him. I don't have a press pass, so I've never sat and said, "What are you about?" I watch him in these post game press conferences. You said that he's taken a lot of bullets. I feel like there hasn't been an ounce of criticism toward Brandon Hyde in the same way that nobody called Dave Tremblay a bad manager or Sam Perlazzo. It is what it is. It's a little different for Hargrove or some managers that may have had some players. Most people in the city don't know who Brandon Hyde is. Literally, he's been here three and a half years, right? Through COVID and all that. I'm thinking he might survive long enough that people might see him sitting in a restaurant and recognize him at some point, because I don't know anything about him. I mean, he's been here 4 years, literally off-season events, showing up, he's a quiet manager who's been here almost half a decade. I mean, it's kind of crazy, but this is going to be his time to survive it and maybe get to the other side, that maybe they'll be in a pennant race with Brandon Hyde as their manager. I wouldn't have bet on that 3 or 4 years ago. I don't think anybody. I think Brandon Hyde would have bet on that.
Yeah. And to clarify, when I say take a lot of bullets, just the fact that he lost so many games.
Oh yeah, he has late nights in hotels, but he knew that in March when he showed up in Sarasota, and he doesn't have to read that he's a failure and that the team's terrible and God damn that manager and that pitching. Yeah. But none of that. There's none of that going on for him. It has been a very quiet. It's not like he's a manager of a New York team or a Boston team or a Philadelphia team. I mean, they've run they've run Kapler and they've run Girardi out of Philly, right? Like so, right. It happens.
Yeah, it does happen, and I would say in that case, both those managers probably were pointing to their bullpen, and so
general manager, get me some arms, get me
there
some
you
players,
go,
right?
There you go. Well, they brought in players, but yeah, so not necessarily the right players all the time, but. Yeah, I mean,
Jake Arrieta will get you blown up,
especially late career Jake Arrieta. But but you're right. It has been a very anonymous 4 years for Brandon Hyde. Just because no one's watching them with that critical eye, and that's again where I say, how do you really know? You can look at an 8th inning bullpen move. Not so much this year, where they've been in more games, they've won more games, but the last 3 years where you just say, well, he can't pitch. He has 3 good arms in his bullpen. He can't pitch those guys every single night. So yeah, he is going to have to go to that guy where you say, who? What the heck is he doing in the game? So
then there's not late inning and the bases are loaded and Chirinos is up, and I'm seeing Nathan Ruiz tweet about it, and I'm thinking, well, they're probably going to lose, and he probably knew that when he went up, right?
Yeah, and that's where you still do look at this team, and you look at the lineup on a nightly basis. 1 through 6 is looking better and better, especially with Rutschman now added, but you get to the bottom 3 spots and you say, yeah, there's still some work to do, and that's where I said, look at what Jordan Westberg's doing at Norfolk right now. Look at what Gunnar Henderson, who's 20 years old, is doing at Norfolk right now. That there's something there. That between those 2 guys, I'm not saying they're both going to be all-stars, but there's talent there, and there's something to be excited about there. So, when we see them, probably going to be later on. Westberg, I think, better chance than Henderson because Westberg's a little bit older, but it's exciting to see, and it's been a much more enjoyable product. Still a long ways to go. Want to continue to stress that, but hey, you're talking about a team that is not 30 games under 500 right now, which we've been talking about teams that were 30 under 500 in late June, in recent years. So it sure beats that. That's stating the obvious.
Well, I tell you what, it was a beautiful weekend, and the weather was lovely outside, and with the death of Goose, it has taken me to my archives, right? Like I've been remembering that you and I did a segment on Goose the other day, and I forgot to tell you the story about Denver when he told me he loved me. He got hit in the head. He was very concussed. And I came out, and he didn't even look like the same guy. He looked like this big, dopey kind of guy sitting on the curb. His personality, all that bluster of Goose the Goose. Hey Ness, come over here, man. Like, I love you, man. I love you. I remember these stories, and it took me 20 years. I don't think I've told that story to Goose, and Goose doesn't remember it, but it happened. And I started looking for pictures. And Luke, was I in your life when the Nasty Newsletter happened, the late 90s?
No,
That probably was not in your life, right? You were a
no.
kid, right? You're
Yeah,
15 years old, right?
I think I met you at an Orioles fan fest probably in the late '90s at some point, but
Really?
I didn't know you until
See, I don't even know this. Our first
contest in
meeting was at an Oriole
2009.
Fan
So
Fest?
yeah, it was, you know what? I'm trying to think because I was there with my father.
Convention Center?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I think it may have been club level then still. Because
Well,
remember, they
Moonlight
did.
Madness, that's what I was going to say. I had to tell a story.
No,
Guys
but
from
I'm thinking.
Oakland that wrote the story on The Ringer about the city of Oakland, he's writing a Baltimore story. I did an hour interview with him last week, not on the air. It was just he and I talking about Baltimore as a sports town and, money and baseball and all that. And we did start to throw up some of those, some old school stuff about Moonlight Madness and 3.6 million. I told him these stories. He's like, I don't know anything about that. I said, you better Google Moonlight Madness because it was a big deal. Like, the season was sold out before Christmas. December 15th, the entire year was sold out. And if you got 4 tickets for a Twins game, you felt lucky. Your dad scored you tickets when you were 10 years old. You were lucky to go to the ballpark, right?
Mm-hmm. Oh, absolutely. It was a premium ticket back then. So absolutely.
It's almost like Paul McCartney. So nonetheless, I'm looking for, in the newsletter, there was a picture of me and Goose and Marino at this bar in San Diego. And I remember taking the picture, and I'm thinking, that picture, I've never seen that picture in a picture. It was always under glass. So back when you went to the photo mat in the 90s, sometimes Hennessy would make double prints. Sometimes he'd make single prints. If we made single prints and the piece went under glass, it's the only picture I have. Like Johnny Unitas, a bunch of pictures from that era. The last day at Memorial Stadium, I don't have doubles. I had one set, and the picture of me and Lydell Mitchell's under glass, and that's Art Donovan. It's under glass. So in order to take a picture of it, you have to like wave all the dust off of it. So I found Marino picture. I found the picture in the newsletter in black and white, and then I found like a really bad picture, and I'm like, I know the original. I pulled it out underneath the glass. There was glass shards in it because the glass broke, and I had to vacuum the picture. I remember vacuuming Goose's face 5 years ago, and I'm like, where's the picture? So I'm looking, dude. At the bottom of a box. I thought all of this had been stolen. So I do want to share this because it is sort of a holy grail thing. I've had a lot of stuff stolen here through the years, but I found every Luis Aparicio baseball card in my collection, all autographed by Luis back in 1986 when I went down to the Belvedere Hotel. So my love of baseball, that's been all of mine. There's a post 1961 and 62 post serial in there. Impossible to get these cards. That coin there is worth like $50 too. And old school Baltimore stuff, old school Chicago stuff. A letter from Peter Uberoth. I mean, Marty Conway's going to appreciate that because Peter Uberoth was his boss. I found these 1974 postage stamps from Topps that I didn't know exist, but the Nolan Ryan's worth $100. It's on there. So I found all these cards. Were you a baseball card collector, Lucas, or were you? Look at this, 71 Kellogg's. See that right there? It's not even cracked. All the Kellogg's cards cracked from 70 and 71. And there's the final, the 74 Aparicio. There's a 71 Kellogg's and some old pictures and stuff like that. So I shared this and the postcards from when he went into the Hall of Fame in 1984, signed. There's a beveled deck, Legends of the Game. So baseball cards. God, man, when I found those, except that I don't have a couple Sixto Lescanos around here. Somebody put a Rick Dempsey up on the wall years ago. But I found something that I thought was stolen. Not that it's worth a lot of money, because it's probably worth $1,000 or $2,000. I don't know. But I at the end of the day, I'm interested in the history of the game in that way and finding these old cards. And what I've been researching is the 1970 Chicago White Sox jerseys that were the baby blue, the powder blue, and then they went to the red the next year that like Wilbur Wood and Goose Gossage and those guys wore. Dick Allen, Dick Melton, those guys, Bill Melton, excuse me, wore in that era. So yeah. Little history, man. It's been a while since I touched baseball cards and moved through them a little bit. Makes me want to go to like a show and be like looking for a Heartland statue, a Mickey Mantle or something.
It's fun. It's fun. I was huge into baseball cards as a kid, much more the type of dad would pick up a pack of 1991 tops, and you get the 15 cards and the stale stick of gum, and you're hoping you'd get a Cal Ripken
And
card.
you're
So
looking for a Ben McDonald at that point. No
yeah,
doubt, right?
I mean, I did. I remember I got a 1991 Upper Deck Mike Messina rookie card. It's not worth a whole lot. Most of my cards, it's modest. The few valuable cards I have, I purchased at some point, saving up my money, saving up my allowance as a kid. But something I loved, and certainly, you and I have talked about this. When you think about statistics and citing statistics, now none of us remember statistics because it's all there on the internet. Back then, you remembered that Cal Ripken hit 34 homers in 1991 because you memorized it on the back of his baseball card.
He drove it 114 too, but I don't have memories like that.
Exactly, 323 average, right?
That's all. Yeah, that's it.
So
things like that.
But that was baseball cards. That at least for me, I mean, that's how I memorized those things. So it's just fun to reminisce. I still have my cards. It's mostly common junk. Very few cards that are of value.
What's the best card you have? You have a Ripken rookie or something?
I mean, I received a Cal rookie for Christmas one year. I mean, I do have some old cards here and there. I have a Roger Maris 19. I guess it's a 62 Topps World Series card. Topps had a series of 7 cards or something like that based on the previous year's World Series. That's worth a little bit of money. I've got a couple okay football cards here and there, but nothing that's life-changing money or anything like that.
My son and his wife live in my childhood house in Dundalk, and my father had a 1966 set. So I always, my parents lost their son in 1969 with drowning, right? So I would think anything that they found of his was probably a lot more than I realized it in the 70s. But my father had a 1966 set. Hank Aaron was the first card in the set. And some cards were missing, but I always had the 66 set when I was a little boy, like 74, 75, 76. I had the 66 cards, and it turned me on to cards. And, I talk a lot about collecting the Pacifica belt buckles. My buddy John Allen, his uncle, Marty Balistreri, had Paper Doll in Highlandtown, and he always had baseball cards, sets of 73, 74s. I'm talking about 78, 79, 80, where you could get a little bit of an older card. And then I collected cards, but I had a lot of cards in the 50s and 60s. Really I had a 55 Clemente at one point. I had a 54 Aaron with some holes in it. I had a Jackie Robinson, a 54 Robinson that was torn up. I got to replace my 58 Aparicio. And I've been thinking about this for 20 years, that if I ever found them, because I really thought they were stolen and fenced, because stuff around the radio station got stolen. It just did, especially at the turn of the century. I might have had a thief working here then. Might have. But I just thought it was gone. So when I found it, I thought this had been stolen and fenced. And when I found it, the first thing I said to myself is, I got to get that 61 high number. And the 58 was destroyed. So I found the destroyed 58 Aparicio. And here's the craziest thing, Luke. During the period of time of my life, I said on the air so many times that I was trying to find the 61 Aparicio high number. True story. And it took me a while to remember this. A lister came and gave it to me.
That's cool.
A lister came and gave it to me, and I put it in the envelope 20 years ago. When I pulled it out, it's the only card, not the only, because there's a couple 73s. Fans have given me, they find a Louis Aparicio 72 card, they give it to me, literally, right? So I have several of, the modern late 70s or early 70s cards. But this 61 high number was it was a $100 card. Like I couldn't get it. You didn't go into a show and find it, certainly not find it in good condition. I found it in the pile. I was texting with Mark Miller from Blondell Miller Schuler, who collects Brooks Robinson cards. He has a lot of really nice cards from the 50s that he's a collector. And I texted him when I found them. It was the first one I knew he'd be excited that I found the cards, because I told him, they got stolen years ago. And I found them. And I said, I still need that 61 high number. And an hour later, I'm fingering through. I'm like, oh my God. Somebody gave it to me. I forgot that. Somebody gave me the 61I number. So I have the entire set now, but it's the only one not autographed, because I didn't have it in 1986 to have Louis sign it. So, Louis signed these 36 years ago.
Pretty cool. It's really cool.
It's unbelievable. Like that letter that day. And I'll leave you with this, because you like baseball. So I go to Louis' hotel room in 1986, August of 86. They were playing an old timers game. And I saw Eddie Watt throw BP at 58 years of age, and I stood behind the cage, and he was still throwing 80. And I was like, I was
That's wild.
backing off of Eddie Watt throwing BP in 1986. So you remember these things. But I went down to his place during the day. We spent the whole afternoon together, believe it or not, drinking beer. I wasn't. I was 17. I couldn't drink, but he wanted me to go get beer, but he's Venezuelan. It's a long story. He drank a lot of beer. So we sat there and watched baseball, and Ozzie Guillen was playing for the White Sox that day on the game of the week, the Joe Garagiola, Tony Kubek game of the week. And he spent 2 hours talking about what a great player Ozzie Guillen was going to be. So that's all I remember about that day, 36 years later. But I found baseball cards. Baseball's relevant, even though you have to stay up late to watch it for parts of this week. But they are having an afternoon game a little later on this week in Seattle. They'll be off to Minnesota. Luke will be covering all things Orioles. I don't know what to say about the Jalen Ferguson Goose situation. We talked a lot about that last week. Obviously, a tragic situation for the Ravens all the way around. We're going to bury Goose on Wednesday this week. So up in Kenilworth, New Jersey. And there's a lot of Goose memories out at Baltimore Positive. I'm Nestor. He's Luke. We'll step out. We'll take a break. We're doing more. We're talking baseball. We're going to continue to talk about Goose and continue to talk about great stuff. Purple Rain 1, available Baltimore Positive. Go get it.